Hola, bon dia. Good morning, everyone. Buenos días. Benvinguts al penúltim dia de Model, Festival d'Arquitectures de Barcelona. Avui comencem amb una sèrie de provocacions, reflexions i manifestos, per la falta d'una altra paraula, de com podem articular certs conceptes, certes paraules, certes formes de definir què és allò que sentim, què és allò que construïm, què és allò que ens regula i d'una certa forma què és allò que construïm com a arquitectes, artistes, pensadors, filòsofs. Les paraules és últimament aquest bloc semiòtic que ens construeix la feina que fem. Els manifestos com a formats quasi heredats en menys de 200 anys van començar com a factures, quasi, com a manifest d'una transacció, d'un espai transaccional. Aquí avui estem dient això, manifest 10x10, perquè en realitat estem intentant també produir i obrir aquest espai de declaració, de proclamació i de reflexió. Estem tots molt acostumats a tindre converses d'hores llarguíssimes, productives fins a tantes de la matinada, i potser tots el que voldríem és que això es convertigués en una d'aquestes. Però també vivim en una societat que té una atenció de segons, de 10, de 15, de 20. Entre aquestes temporalitats de l'estructuració d'un projecte de recerca que dura anys o nits, a hores, a minuts, a segons, aquest format intenta provocar converses, reflexions curtes que potser ens ajude a sentir aquell moment iniciàtic de tot pensament reflexiu que és un espai de sorpresa. Tenim una gran llista de participants acústics i humans que ens ajudaran a fer d'aquest esdeveniment al carrer i a l'espai públic un dels moments de reflexió d'aquest festival Model. No faré presentacions, podeu trobar les grans biografies de tots els participants locals, forasters, que participen en aquest festival, que participen en aquest 10x10 manifest i que en realitat avui senzillament es presentaran a través de la seva veu i de les seves idees. Començarem amb una reflexió sobre l'amor, però amb una veu local. Aquest 10x10 manifest està intentant tindre aquest lloc entre allò local i allò forà, entre aquell que ve i aquell que està, entre aquell que coneix i aquell que està descobrint i aquell que vol compartir. Començarem amb les arquitectes i Saree, que han sigut les dissenyadores d'aquest espai de cures, d'un espai de lactància en col·lectiu, que avui és l'escenari d'aquest dia 29 d'abril del 2023. Amb això li vull donar la paraula a la Raquel. Raquel, és el teu torn.
Hola, moltes gràcies Eva i Festival Model per convidar-nos. Jo començaré llegint un manifest que vol obrir moltes preguntes més que generar respostes i començo. Són moltes les feministes que han reflexionat sobre l'amor i les cures al llarg del temps i que encara ho continuen fent. Què entenem per amor? Com el vivim? Què ha suposat l'amor per a les dones i dissidències? Com explica l'escriptora Silvia Federici, reconeguda activista feminista i marxista italiana, le dicen amor al trabajo no pagado. En la familia se dice amor. Dicen que por amor se limpia y se cocina, que todo se hace por amor. Confunden amor con un servicio personal. El amor es un sistema que obliga a muchas mujeres que no tenían posibilidades de sobrevivencia y el matrimonio era como tomar un empleo. El matrimonio se presume con el que compra tu cuerpo y que siempre tienes que estar a su disposición. A todo esto, muchas luchas feministas han dicho que ni el hombre ni el matrimonio tienen derecho absoluto a tu cuerpo. Nosaltres ens preguntem, quantes hores de feina gratis han fet les nostres àvies, les nostres mares, les nostres amigues i nosaltres en nom de l'amor? Como señala Federici, es importante comprender que el conflicto se produce en el trabajo asalariado y el trabajo no asalariado. Crea una jerarquía laboral y se crea una naturalización de la explotación de la mujer. Por eso creen que el trabajo doméstico pertenece a la naturaleza de la mujer y contra eso es lo que hay que luchar. El trabajo doméstico es un sistema de explotación que usa el amor y usa las relaciones entre hombres y mujeres. És llavors la renúncia a l'amor el que hauríem de buscar? El que proposem és crear noves o no tan noves formes d'estimar, d'amor i de cuidar-nos. Com va declarar l'Emma Goldman, feminista y anarquista que creía en l'amor com a motor y forma transformadora, para que la mujer llegue a su verdadera emancipación, debe dejar de lado las ridículas nociones de que ser amada, estar comprometida y ser madre es sinónimo de estar esclavizada o subordinada. I com afegeix la filòsofa argentina Tamara Tenenbaum en el seu assaig del fin del amor, el fin del amor romántico no tiene por qué ser el fin del amor. Y eso es central, porque tiene que ver con salir de la lógica del individuo y tomar la comunidad como unidad de análisis y como horizonte de transformación. Creo que lo que estamos intentando las feministas es inventar una tercera opción, una ética de la otredad, que no sea una ética del sacrificio, una idea de felicidad que sea colectiva sin ser opresiva. Pensar comunidades elegidas, relaciones basadas en la possibilitat de compartir antes que de negociar. I amb tot això, què volem dir? Nosaltres volem reivindicar l'amor i les cures en col·lectiu, fomentant les xarxes d'afecte, el suport mutu i la col·lectivitat, trencant amb les dinàmiques l'individualisme i les opressions capitalistes, patriarcals i colonials. Y no només això, sino como reclama Tenenbaum, vamos a reivindicar el deseo, pero también los lazos de cuidado, exigiendo políticas públicas que nos permitan organizar nuestros vínculos sin pensar quién nos va a mantener cuando necesitemos ayuda. I amb això acabo i us llenço la pregunta. Ens deixa aquest sistema estimar? Tenim temps suficient i de la qualitat per estimar-nos i cuidar-nos? Gràcies.
The language that we are going to be using today is one maybe of love and of care. If anyone needs translation, there is a screen over there, and we also have live translation. Today we are going to have in this installation that Raquel just gave us somehow of the intellectual backbone, a series of lunches, talks, and discussions about how do we create and co-create collectively. Perhaps we all have experience the moment in which you find a book, and a book that opens up your way of thinking and reflecting about something that you feel that you don't know, and you know that you have never known, but you will actually never really be able to grasp, from a point of view that open up some hope. And that is someone who many of you do know as an artist, and I would say also as a philosopher and as a poet, is Ingo Nierman. Ingo, you're going next.
Hello. You hear me? Okay. Yeah, I'm supposed to speak about love, no? And first of all, I must say that I think love is super problematic. Yeah, it's not as we just heard. It's been used to exploit people, and it's not just women who have been exploited with love. Think of nationalism. You know, it's basically a way to exploit people. Or consumerism. It mainly means that you love to consume. You love those consumer goods. You know, this is love. This deep, deep, deep affection. And we know how it's used. And how it's used to exploit the whole world. So another problem with love is that, you know, even when you think of these like nice, communal, non-hierarchical ways of love, that they always exclude people. You know, there is the moment you build a community, you develop this like nice bonding hormones, oxytocin. It always means that you inevitably kind of you distance from others because you can love only so much. Your affection for some people usually means no affection for others. There's this idea of that you could kind of fall in love with the whole world, but I think it's not. I don't think it's possible. So starting with all this like pessimism, this for me was the starting point to then think, oh, but could it be done differently? And I thought, yes, so the only thing that you can do is, think love is something highly, highly, highly problematic, and of what you're doing. That love is you could argue it's the main source of injustice. So how to love, kind of with more sense of justice, and I think you can only compensate. So. And so I started a project called Army of Love, and I cannot really dig into it, but the main approach is not, make you fall in love with the world. Impossible. Only you can do is think of certain things, aversions that you have, dislikes, and then kind of what we do, we do practice. It's not about intentions. It's really about practicing, of doing exercise, of overcoming those aversions. Yeah, you realize. I mean, when you think of romantic love, it's very much like Nazi love. Yeah, this is like there's a lot of ableism in it. There's a lot of racism in it. There's a lot of classism in it, and so on and so on. Of what every kind of ugly thing you can think of, it's condensed in romantic love. I mean, look, any kind of, and you might start just by look like a random rom-com, or maybe the rom-com you feel most inclined to, and then think of how horrible, the ideological conceptions are that are underlying this love. And this might be a first step of getting out of this horrible, horrible love. Thank you.
This is not yet a conversation, but then I will ask, what about empathy? And so we actually follow with Didier, Fiúza, Faustino on perhaps another concept that is not diametrically opposed, but is a concept that actually moves us into different directions, that is the one of violence.
Gracias. I have some slides. Okay. So balance between peace, love, or different balance. We're currently living in a world of violence. So yeah. So I will start just to show you a project for a project of architecture, a building we designed for a French artist, Jean-Luc Moulin, in countryside. And this building became a kind of interesting proposal, because it's a proposal for work, for this artist work, and we decided to make it the most simply according to his needs, and to try to balance between his needs and the surrounding world. Surrounding world is the countryside, a kind of bourgeois, very smooth, lovely countryside in France. And the buildings start to have a kind of very, very reactions from the surrounding neighbors, because it's supposed to be an ugly building. But then Jean-Luc invites the people to get in, to visit this building, to visit this place. So he opened the door and trying to accommodate with these neighbors. And I will say, these days, they are coming a bit more peaceful about this building. It's a building built with super low economy. We go to the essential, and we try to balance between comfort, clearness, and well-being. I don't know. And it's bring me to a question about this round table about the violence. We have built up a world of violence of centuries of over-exploitation, production and consumption, resulting in an unprecedented climate crisis with dramatic humanitarian consequences. Violence of wars and conflicts on all continents for the control of wealth and power. leading to the destruction of innocent lives, natural resources, and cultural heritage. Violence of increasing political authoritarianism, repressing, imprisoning, if not killing protesters and dissidents. Violence of economical and social marginalization, exclusion of the poor, the weak, the outsiders. Violence of racism and all kinds of discrimination against women, non-heterosexuals, the ill and the disabled. Every little roughness, sign of difference, dissonance, erupt aside, despised, shut up. At the same time, perfection, morality, and well-being is put up front, magnified. Happiness is quantified. Everything must be successful. In a constant quest for the highest performance. There is no place for failure nor imperfection. Some say that beauty is sleek, but for me, the quote French female artist Sylvie Blocher, violence is sleek. So to go against this violence, we opt to refuse sleekness and to bring roughness and fragility. This means caring for what is meaningful, essential. This means questioning reality, looking into our darker selves to reveal our paradox and gain awareness of life and death. Last but not least, this means provoking desire, looking for, forget word, eroticism, rather than pornography. What you see is not what you get. Whispering instead of shouting, don't trust architects, don't trust yourself. I know it may be too late for tomorrow, but we still can build tools for tomorrow, imperfect tools for an imperfect world. Thank you.
The way in which one is able to make a provocation into someone that knows always how to bring it back. We also have here in the stage my co-curator, adjunct curator, Saúl Baeza, who has managed also to bring a group of people that we have never really been exposed as architects. And I think that that's also the richness of a place like this, is to actually bring people against, with each other. Las Oblicuas, here on stage, on violence, amb la violència.
Hola, moltes gràcies per convidar-nos. Nosaltres som Oblicuas, som un col·lectiu de dissenyadores, artistes i investigadores de Barcelona. Som la Júlia, la Judit i la Clàudia i l'Elsa, que som nosaltres. I ahir, quan estàvem preparant i pensant que em quedi en aquesta intervenció, intentant vincular violència amb disseny i amb objectes, que és on s'emmarca la nostra pràctica com a col·lectiu, el primer que se'ns venia al cap era parlar d'objectes que han estat dissenyats explícitament per la violència. Pensàvem en armes, pensàvem en concertines. Si ho portem més al passat, també pensàvem en corsets de l'època victoriana. Objectes que estan dissenyats i que expliciten la seva hostilitat. O sigui, posar una valla amb alambre de pues en una frontera no deixa espai a dubte que aquests espais són espais hostils i violents, sobretot cap als cossos racialitzats. Però en el que volíem parlar avui era no d'aquests objectes en què la violència es fa explícita, sinó objectes que no estan pensats per ser violents, però que en una situació determinada, per alguna necessitat, es tornen objectes utilitzats per la violència directa i en l'exemple que us volem explicar avui també per l'autodefensa.
Hola, sí? Hi ha un exemple que ens sembla molt interessant, que són objectes que no van estar dissenyats explícitament per ser violents, però es van acabar convertint en armes blanques, són les agulles de barret, i és que durant la Belle Époque, a finals del segle XIX, principis del segle XX, a Europa, però també a Estats Units i a Austràlia, la moda de les dones de la classe alta es caracteritzava per l'ús d'aquests espectaculars barrets, i aquests anaven fixats com amb una agulla de grans dimensions, i aquestes agulles no eren només funcionals, sinó que també tenien un punt molt estètic i molt ornamental, i quedaven també desapercebudes entre tots els altres ornaments que portaven els barrets. Què passa? Que en moments com hi havia moltes situacions d'abusos sexuals i agressions al carrer, i es van acabar convertint en armes blanques, improvisades, i en un element com d'autodefensa. I van haver-hi nombrosos casos arreu del món d'atacs amb les agulles de barret. També en alguns països va arribar a prohibir, es van intentar limitar les dimensions que no superessin els 30 centímetres de llargada, i a Austràlia van empresonar també algunes dones pel simple fet de portar-les, fins i tot no les havien utilitzat per atacar, però el fet de portar-les i era equiparar-les amb una arma blanca mortal, i ja les van arribar a empresonar en molts casos. I també hi ha molts documents gràfics al voltant de tot això, bastant interessants. Al final això eren peces estètiques i funcionals a nivell de que podies fixar el barret en una posició concreta, però s'acabava alterant la funció de l'objecte per convertir-se en una arma d'autodefensa. I això, parlàvem ara de les agulles de barret, però també va passar com amb els paraigües, per exemple, o amb altres objectes com que la policia anava registrant, des de les agulles de barret fins a paraigües, fins a sabates, llibres, una gran llista d'objectes que s'utilitzaven com en armes. És evident que ara ja no portem agulles de barret per l'evolució de la moda i per la indumentària, però és interessant pensar com ha anat evolucionant aquesta agulla de barret, i si hi ha avui en dia algun objecte que hem incorporat o que tenim en els nostres recorreguts que ens pot fer sentir una mica més segures, com se'ns ocorria ahir, per exemple, utilitzar les claus per entrar a casa com a possible arma d'autodefensa en algun moment determinat, o portar el cas de la moto. Hi havia diversos objectes que no havien estat dissenyats com a elements de seguretat, però que en algun moment concret podien arribar a proporcionar-nos aquesta funció.
I com tenint en compte que... Se sent? Vale. Tenint en compte que interactuem tota l'estona amb objectes i que d'alguna manera condicionen com ens relacionem entre nosaltres i amb l'entorn, això és una cosa que nosaltres des del col·lectiu ens interessa molt, i creiem que com en aquest trencament formal, funcional d'un objecte hi ha molta potencialitat. També ens fa veure els objectes com molt més del que són, i ens obre com camins a reapropiar-nos de la materialitat, i també a generar nous vincles tant amb els objectes com amb les altres persones.
You made me really think about some of the things that I wear in my head, and it's actually very much true. From love to violence to indifference, maybe those three words, they have a lot of things in common, perhaps not. We have Sam Chermayeff, who is going to open up that conversation.
Thanks for having me. It turns out that I'm really an earnest American, and I don't think of myself as indifferent at all. I'm sure that I am in ways that I'm not that aware of, but as a baseline condition, I assume that I'm trying to do good, but maybe that is wrong. Sorry, I know that that's wrong. But I do start that. So, of course, as an earnest American, I think, like, where did I do something good that was kind of indifferent? And, like, how did that work? And so, together with another office, Gonzalez Haas and my partner, June 14th, we did something called The Colors of Catastrophe that was actually a book that I found that they made. And so, I don't know if anybody remembers, but maybe 15 years ago when you Googled using rather slow internet, Google would average out an image. So it would take, a picture of whatever and give you one color while you were scrolling, if you scrolled quite fast. It was like a certain moment in the algorithm, let's say. And Pierre-Georges Gonzalez came up with this idea that those colors were quite interesting. So he started to look at what Google automatically did from images and turn them into a color palette. And I found this book, which he made 3 copies of originally. Very recently, 10 years later, he made the whole set. And I don't know if some of you are architects, so you may have had this experience where you're sitting with a client and suddenly you're talking about the meaning of a color and why somebody should paint their wall whatever. And this question, I'm truly indifferent to this question. I don't care what color you paint your wall. I really don't. You can also paint my wall another color. It's just paint. And color to me, it doesn't mean anything really, unless you give it that meaning, and that's up to you. And so I took this color palette, and this is my favorite example, and there were all kinds of disasters, but there's a photograph of trash that makes a beautiful gray. There's this very beautiful beige from a photograph of Syria, and these colors are of quite dark things. But of course, like, I gave this to a client, all this set, and they said, "Can you come paint my house?" And I said, "No, yeah, but you can choose from these colors." And of course, the sort of boring client lady chose the beige from the Syrian war as her bedroom, and the little boy's bedroom chose, like, the broken dreams of the Challenger explosion. And it's beautiful, but I don't know what it means, and I'm not indifferent to people dying, certainly, and neither are they, and so sort of reducing something down to this meaning that then you can put on it or not, or it says something to you or it doesn't say something to you, seems like a really useful tool to survive in this day and age, that you start to call things out, you start to say that there's a relation. But mostly I'm afraid of not knowing, and indifference is a moment when you say, it's okay that I don't know. And that's really rare. Architects, I'm constantly forced to be like, I know what's good in this situation here now, and most of the time, of course, I have no fucking idea. So it's nice to celebrate, if I'm going to have a manifesto about this, not knowing and trying to kind of figure out an elegant as possible way to not know. And so I show pictures of my recent house, which is empty, and I have no idea what's supposed to go there, and that fridge surely doesn't work, and I think it's a cool space, but you could put anything there. And my clients are asking every day, like, what am I going to do with this? Should I move this? And I'm like, yeah, put the radio there. Fine. And I don't know. I make a lot of kitchens, and so I don't know where it should go. I don't know what it should be. So the oven's on wheels, and there's a toaster on a stand, and you can move it, and the sink doesn't really work, and it's perfect, right? And I don't know, and I don't have to know, and I'm not so clear about it, and that helps me. And then you can just, if you really don't know, you can just get a tent, because theologically speaking, like, we should all live in tents and forget about everything. And that I like that the Bible is quite clear about that. That, okay, after all this, if you don't know, just have a tent, and that's all you need, and you don't own anything, and you don't have to work it out. So that's that's my tent. And this photograph has never been shown. I never thought about it until thinking about indifference. And then I was like, yeah, but the tent can be whatever it needs to be. And then I have this fur hammock from Bless. And I'm really nervous about a fur hammock. And I'm like, does fur make sense? I mean, Berlin's cold and it's cozy, and that part makes sense. But I don't know what it's supposed to mean, and I don't know how you're supposed to live in my own house. And I find that actually, and saying it out loud, very reassuring. So, thanks a lot.
Someone whose day of yesterday made a difference in her life and trajectory, and that somehow has always managed to make a difference in any conversation, independently of what is being discussed. So there was probably nothing more provocative than to ask about indifference to Chus Martínez. So
I actually would like to talk about ignorance, and it connects with what you just said. And I've been kind of obsessed by the fact that when we talk about surpassing certain binaries, people kind of distinguish in between knowledge and ignorance. And actually they think that they shouldn't be surpassed in a way that both entities merge, but one of them should be erased because it's lacking. And I connect ignorance also with poverty, and many people tend to think that both should disappear, that it's actually bad to have a group in the society they are ignorant or that they don't know. And I don't think so. And I don't know if any of you have illiterate people in your family, but I do have. And when people don't know how to read or they don't know how to write, they are not lacking anything. They just don't have this knowledge. And I think that it's really, really important to think the world through this, and not in opposition, but actually in a positive way, think about these dimensions of life that are so important, because there are millions of people out there that they don't know how to read or write, and actually they have the same right to the world as we have. And also, think about the metaphors that we use, for example, to talk about poverty and the idea of the poverty line. And because poverty seems like something that we agree on making disappear, below the poverty line, this situation should not have the same kind of substance in culture, in architecture, in education, as above the poverty line. Because the below moment of the poverty line is something that we don't think that much about it structurally. We are really not giving it a space for culture there. And I think more and more, how would it be if we just embrace the possibility in every program we do and in every language we actually use, in every way that we understand writing as an expansion of orality, that we kind of start to including and actually make a hybrid world where there is enough of both worlds, so that this kind of binary, which is so present, even more present day by day, is actually at least faced, and we have a vision of it, we have an imagination of it, that we have a desire for it, that we actually have a language for it, and we have an encounter and a nearness for it. So that's why I became so in favor of ignorance and poverty.
In favor of ignorance, in favor of poverty is obviously trying to frame a space that is another as a space that has a substance and a space that actually needs to be valued in its own terms. We started escaping from love, going through violence and ending in indifference. And in a strange way, the festival has put the words of radical empathy into the forefront as a way to try to go back to our roots as radical. Radical somehow doesn't allow us to be indifferent, but allows us to actually make statements as the ones that Chus just made, in a particular sense, going back to the root of a particular form or essence, that allows us to then constitute an entire new space. And I think empathy is probably what you just also expressed, an understanding for another that is not necessarily yours, that you in fact ultimately respect and that do want to provide the space for that. But for me, what these two words of radical empathy try to somehow put onto the table has to do with what are the words and what are the terms that we can use to operate, to actually build upon and to develop forward as we are trying to constantly articulate our ideas. And so Saúl and I were saying, how are we going to try to articulate some of those questions and some of those reflections in a collective space? So maybe you want to actually jump in and put some of our guests into space of reflection that we have tried the entire festival to produce. No?
Mm-hmm. Now I was thinking through your reflection, the idea of radical empathy, and maybe that's a question that I've never asked you before, Eva. But like radical... Like when we say radical empathy, for you, that topic of radical implies violence, like being violently radical?
This was not a conversation for me. I think that existence is violent. I think our life is violent. We consume, we touch, we engage with. I think the question is, how does one use that violence for? And how respectful one is when we eat food, when we eat an animal, when we eat vegetable, when we actually talk to someone, when we take someone's life or time. There is a space of violence that is also care. And so I think radical for me was a way of going back to the roots of what is that, that we are really trying to understand by empathy. But yes, it's not only being empathic as a kind of a first act of understanding the other, is going way beyond into what is that we understand this other to be. So I think I'm very interested in the reflection, not of love. And Ingo, I know that was a word that you have in, the army of love. You probably have thought about those words and terms. And I would love for you to maybe think or share with us some of your reflections on the term of empathy as a one that is tangent, that is maybe less, it can touch love, but is not loaded with all the pejorative, instrumentalized, extractive, oppressive conditions that I think love carries. Or does it? That's for me one of the questions. Trying to bring empathy as a word into the forefront is a way to try to talk about some of the conditions of love without actually all the burden of it.
Yeah, they have. Hello, yeah. I mean, there have been several ways to strategies of people trying to avoid the term love. There's a book in German was published called, like, if you would translate it into English, it's called Radical Tenderness instead of love. Also using the word radical and this idea, okay, you have to be more yeah, it's a good question. Empathy. I think in a way you could of course say you can love somebody and have no empathy. Yeah? This we have to be clear with. So empathy, I don't think love is necessarily particularly strong in empathy. And hate can also be very much steered by empathy. So violence also, I mean, when you think of jealousy, it is based on a lot of empathy. You have a lot of empathy for people who you think are in a better situation than yourself. Yeah, so I don't see. Then again, I don't think that it's that empathy is kind of a love that is but without all this like romantic problems. I think it's a completely different. It's not the same. Empathy is actually something different. It can, love of course, can involve a lot of empathy. But for instance, I think when I think of my parents, they loved me so much, but their love was steered by sheer ignorance and by an unwillingness even to really have empathy with my feeling. Yeah, was actually my mental state. They were not capable, and they were also not interested in it. And I could, and the only reason I could tolerate this, and it was bearable for me, was that I knew that they loved me and I loved them. So in that sense, I would defend love.
You were talking about forms of knowing and not knowing, Sam. In fact, I'm talking about pain and indifference. And in fact, we are in top of a project that this city, as a form of trying, we are right now in the middle of a highway. Like a year ago, this was a highway, yeah? So just by the exercise of paint, senzillament ficant pintura al terra, aquest espai ha sigut conquerit violentament, si volem, contra els cotxes. I moltes de les conversacions que hi ha hagut al voltant d'aquest espai han tingut que veure amb el color de la pintura, o amb el color de les New Jerseys, o amb el color que s'utilitza per demarcar, per produir ciutat. I aquesta idea de ser capaç de ser indiferent o de, en realitat, fer que el color sigui l'espai de lluita, that color becomes the space of fight, és una de les grans qüestions d'aquesta ciutat. Però com a dissenyadores, que ens heu parlat també de petits instruments de defensa. Estàvem parlant de les cures, i de sobte ens hem posat a parlar de com una llista d'elements domèstics també ens obrin aquest espai de defensa. I potser m'agradaria parlar no tant de la violència, sinó de la defensa, de l'espai en què un construeix per defensar-se. Quan un produeix... Aquí estem molt indefensos a l'espai públic. Un auditori, l'arquitectura sempre és un espai que ens intenta protegir, que ens intenta produir un shelter. I cada vegada estem produint shelters més grans. Tenim un gran problema avui en dia també de l'aïllament, de la solitud, com un dels altres símptomes d'aquest espai que ens anem construint espais de defensa personal més i més grans. Com a dissenyadores provocadores que constantment esteu intentant fer petits forats a través de diferents comportaments, m'agradaria pensar quina és la vostra reflexió en relació, potser no tant a la violència, però a la indiferència, i de la indiferència a la solitud, en relació en aquests objectes domèstics que esteu produint aquesta taxonomia. Quines altres taxonomies esteu treballant ara? Quins termes, quines paraules esteu vosaltres treballant des del vostre disseny?
We can also talk in English if it's better, so everyone understands. I really don't know how to answer the question exactly. There's, I think that it's not like violence is not, for instance, a topic that we've worked a lot in our collective, but there's what you were saying about indifference. I think that before, for instance, violence to be, for instance, legitimized, it seems that you first have to create all this imaginary of someone that it's being like for instance, so collective, that it's being infantilized or dehumanized. So then you legitimize this violence towards a collective, and it then seems that it has to be put on the individual to self-defense. Like we were talking about this example of you go with the keys in your hands to protect yourself when you're in the street, but at the end this is not a problem that has to be solved individually and only through self-defense, but it's like a collective problem. And the fact that there's violence on the street is not something that, for instance, us have to fight ourselves individually when we are confronted with it, but it's a problem that we should work on it collectively. And and I think that the system in which we're living that makes us be more individual, I think that goes against collectivizing all these problematics. I don't know. I don't think this is answering your question, but yeah.
No, I was thinking before also seeing the presentations, like Ingo, Didier, and so on violence. At some point it feels like violence is better design than love. And at some point I think that it's easier for us to understand the idea of violence than the idea of love. And that for me like feels kind of like contradictory. But in terms of like complexity, like feeling the presentations that you did, no, and like how we can like really connect all those different objects, architectures, materials, and so on with something that we recognize as something that is violence, no. Also, because violence, it creates on us a kind of an empathy. We see an object that it can be, no, something violent like a gun or something, and it creates that kind of effect, like, you know, that's something. Whoa. And I think that we are missing a lot of those different values, perspectives, and ideas about love. And that's something that it was kind of interesting for me, like listening to the different perspectives. As like love, it's something super complex. Violence, it seems something that is like super defined and specific, and that we all understand.
Definitely.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that when you were talking about the meaning of radical and if radical relates to violence, and I think that is a really interesting combination of words to use, radical empathy, and on the other hand, it's also the trap of intensity. So in modern times, capitalistic times, the question of being intense is very appealing to us. Violence is intense, love is intense, romantic love is intense, radical empathy is intense. But would it be really radical, in my opinion, would be boring empathy, because everything that is really working is very boring, because it's not there anymore, because it's already interiorized, because it's working, because, you know. So when things are starting to be really boring, then they are already in. And I think that that would be the best, in my opinion, use of, let's say, for me, empathy is just a transitional word. It's actually full of problems, but we are using it because we want to transition from those intense, romantic, modern ways of naming, and transitioning towards something more structural and more working, more acting, more touching, more near, is boring.
Then, for example, indifference will be a radical positioning too, no? In that direction, instead of putting you in a place that you have to decide, no, that you have to care. I mean, indifference is already a radical position in the same direction that Chus is proposing.
Is that a question? Absolutely, I agree. Yes. Yeah, sure. No, I really love the idea of. I mean, it seems like what we're getting to is like radical means energy at things, with things, right? And I don't mean that in a new agey way. I mean, like, it takes effort to paint that. It takes effort to kill someone with a hat pin. You know, it's like that energy is also sort of, we are lacking that in a lot of things. I mean, this moment here, forget about the pain, is like a series of quite high energy efforts. And I kind of, the indifference part is like, I sometimes like that that's happening without judgment. That it's like, it's not clear what this is. I mean, this space, this highway, this building, this stage, you know, it's not obvious to me what I'm physically doing here. And I'm fine with that because of energy, right? Because of effort, energy, output, which I think is what you were just talking about, like, at length in terms of how we think. And I think empathy is, for me, is confusing because I'm American, so I think that I'm empathetic, and, you know, so I think, like, it's almost boring. Even radical empathy is almost boring, but the idea of energy and effort and, like, let's say, like, work as energy makes a lot of sense to me. So, anyway.
For me, it's always a very difficult exercise to have a conversation outside of our own spaces, meaning here in the street, here in the billboards, here in the buses. No, I came with a bike today and I saw radical empathy in a bus. And I wonder what is that is able to ignite, no, into the heads of what we would call that generic term that we all are citizens, no? And so when we started to figure out about different themes, about what a city festival could actually be named for this year's theme, the the different interpretations, no, of it is too late to be optimistic, or how actually we could create different, how do you ignite into someone, no, the desire, the curiosity to try to go beyond. And how does one choose a name? How does one choose a site? We are here in Glorious, no, in a construction site where we actually have cranes in which they are transforming a site. It's like, how do you produce a construction site? And so for me, these two words, we're producing a construction site, no? It's the radical and the empathy. But for me, it has always been incredible when I see Didier's work, because it also works out of these contradictions. It does take and it does dig and it does develop into very clear semiotic materials and forms that we all understand where they are coming from, to decontextualize, to problematize, to question them, and to in fact awaken within us a critique on the first place, and then an empathic reaction with it that is able to force us to imagine the what-ifs, no, of the reconstitution and reconfiguration of some of those elements. And you know, I wouldn't know what to call that, because that is not empathy, it is also not violence, it is definitely not indifference. And I think it's very interesting when one sees someone's work, you know, and I really wouldn't know, and maybe you have thought about it deeply, or maybe you haven't, but there is something about that act of transformation of something utterly familiar, utterly violent, and then trying to transform it into something that is not inoffensive either, but it is not loving either, it's something else. Do you have a word for that act of transformation?
Incomfort. It's machines to produce incomfort, basically. I think we are machines, we are humans, bodies. We are built on the question of resilience. We are naturally formed, trained to resist, to forget, to move on. And so when you use these words, I don't know, empathy, even ignorance, love. It's words who are instrumentalized for domination. So for me, all the projects we do, and I think a lot of our production in architecture, design, cleansing, is a way to generate moments of resistance, moments against this resilience, this, I will say, this obvious resilience we have all of us. So it's always to remain, to remember. I mean, for me, violence is the most biggest violence we can find is to forget. So all these elements are, I mean, indifference is an instrument of power to generate indifference. I mean, all these things are elements to dominate from our groups. So how we can fight against that, about this idea, it's probably to produce elements who generate memories. So you talk about some of my works, is always this thing about something familiar. Something is there. In French we say quelque chose qui gratte. Something qui gratte, producing.
With something to gratte. We will actually thank all of you for being here into the mid-summer day of spring, and for actually make us think about what is that we are doing, how we are doing it, and for contributing some of your thoughts and ideas. Thank you, all of you. We are moving into the next phase. Thanks.